Hello, welcome. I'm David Beal from the Friends of the Library in Alameda, California. We're an advocacy group that supports our outstanding public library through volunteerism and monetary support. We support the library in both small things, such as next Monday's meeting of the library's Mystery Readers Club at the West End branch, and large things such as advocating for a new branch to support the growing population of the Alameda Point and Alameda Landing areas. Tonight's program is going to feature the author Carol Edgarian, whose book Vera features a young girl's adventures around the 1906 earthquake and fire that enveloped San Francisco. As far as the Friends of the Library go, you should know that our donors provide the monetary support for these things, and that we ask that you consider a donation to our website, alamedafriends.com, through the or through the link in the chat feature, which we'll be putting up on the screen or in the chat. Before we get started, there are some technical details. This webinar will be recorded and will be available in a few days from on our website. As a webinar, your microphones are muted and cameras are turned off. Your way of communicating with us is through the chat feature, and we encourage you to use the chat feature to introduce yourself and let others know where you're calling in from. Maybe let them know if you felt the earthquake that we had today, which I thought was kind of an omen for tonight's discussion. Also, the chat is an easy way for you to ask questions, which I'll address with Carol in the latter part of the program. We do ask that you keep your questions and comments respectful. Disrespectful comments could result in your being dropped from the program. Now, on to our program. In addition to Vera, Carol Edgarian is the author of two previous bestsellers and critically acclaimed books, The Three Stages of Amazement and Rise the Euphrates. She's also the co-founder of the digital publisher narrativemagazine.com, as well as Narrative in the Schools, which provides resources to teachers and students around the world. She currently lives in the great city, which is the subject of this novel, San Francisco. So I'm delighted to welcome her to our virtual hangout. Welcome, Carol.
Thank you, David. It's wonderful to be here with all of you. And to your point about the earthquake today, I couldn't help but feel it was an auspicious timing. Glad everybody's safe, but yeah, almost a 4-pointer.
Right. I was thinking maybe you could start out by perhaps reading a little bit.
Oh, I'd be happy to. I think I'll read the opening, and then I may read just a very short bit in honor of the quake today, of this quake of 1906. But this is just the first page and a half of the book. First things. I always thought of my city as a woman, but the house, it turned out, was a woman too. When the quake hit, she groaned. Her timbers strained to hold on to their pins, the pins snapping, and the rocks beneath the house, they had voices too. And if ever I wondered how long it would take for the world to end, I know, 45 seconds. An unearthly stillness preceded and followed the shaking. It's what we did and didn't do in the stillness that determined the rest of our days. I lost two mothers that year. The first was Rose. I can't say where she was born or where her kin came from. The fact is, I don't know what mix of blood flows through me. I suspect there's some Persian, possibly Armenian. I understand there may be some Northern African and Spanish in the mix too, and a good pour of French, Spanish by way of Mexico. None of this Rose would confirm or deny. We're mutts, she said, and left it at that. One of the harlots claimed that Rose had been found as a waif in the slums of Mexico City. For a fee, she was brought north. I believe that. I believe most anything when it comes to Rose. She spoke 5 languages. Her hair was blue-black, her skin copper, her eyes green. In San Francisco, she became a much favored prostitute catering to the gold rush miners. Her next clients were the fellows who came after the miners, the suit-wearing merchants and bankers who thought they could gentle a murderous, gambling, whoring town. They thought they could gentle Rose. Instead, she became the grande dame of the Barbary Coast, the Rose of the Rose. She did not raise me. That duty fell to a Swedish widow employed to bring me up to be, I suppose, anything but a hooker. In that, Maury Johnson was successful. I am not a hooker. I am only a thief. So let's see. That's our opening to get into this adventure that features Vera, who is 15 at the start, but the narrator of the book is the much older Vera, who actually is at the time of the telling the oldest living survivor of the quake. And let's see, I want to get to the actual quake. So all you need to know is Maury is the woman who is raising Vera, and Pi is Vera's sister. It was the sound of the earth breaking. The quake climbed through thousands of layers of soil and bones and dinosaurs and fossils and bodies of ancestors known and unknown through the roots of a million trees. Next, it was the moan cry of the house, the old growth redwood weeping as it bent or tried to. 45 seconds is an eternity. Time it if you don't believe me. The shaking went on and on and on. Furniture collided, sections of the ceiling split and fell, no one thing distinct from the next, a cacophony of collapse. In the moonlit shadows, my bureau danced foot to foot, then fell on its face. The bookcase leapt, tripped on the rug, and crashed. The windows bent in their sleeves, straightened audaciously, then burst. The floor undulated in short, choppy waves. The bed, with Rogue and me riding its top, Rogue is her dog, riding its top, sailed as if it were a flying carpet. Rogue jumped off and I had the wits to follow as the headboard hit the windows, bursting the last panes of glass. Then, mercifully, a pause. I got as far as the door. The next trembler started under the house. It thundered as it traveled upward, building, expanding, this one stronger than the first. The earth was a bucking bull that wouldn't quit until it had tossed us from its back. I tried to hold on to the door casing, but a jolt sent me flying face down into the hall. I shielded my head and hoped I wouldn't get beamed by the chunks of plaster falling all around me. That's when Rogue decided to run. He leapt over me and bounded for the stairs. I heard him cry as he tumbled down. I kept thinking, this can't be it. Oh my God, it is. Then abruptly the shaking stopped. Then one more shift, a hip check, deep and low. The house swayed and kept on swaying even after the earth stopped. the house rolling as if on wheels. That's when the front chimney gave way. 1,000 tumbling bricks. Pie, pie. I crawled toward her, bloodying my hands and knees on the rubble. Her room, what little I could see in the shadows, looked as if someone had tossed the furniture against the walls. In place of the front wall, where the windows had been, there was no wall at all, only the pre-dawn sky. Pie, Pie, where are you? Then I remembered she was with Maury.
Wow, if that doesn't make you get your earthquake preparedness kit all together, I don't know what will.
I know. But then, of course, what followed the Great Quake was the fire.
Yeah.
Which
right.
At the end, at the end of the end, 228,000 buildings, 500 city blocks, just destroyed.
Right.
So there you go.
Right. I was taken with your a couple of different places in the book. You describe the city as a woman, you know, as I'm wondering if that.
Yeah, I think you're referring to.
Toward the end and in the beginning.
Well, it's in the beginning. I looked to my left to where San Francisco rose on tiptoe. Seeing her in her morning whites always made me feel better. My city was young, bold, having burned to the ground 5 times and 5 times come back richer and more brazen. To know her was to hold in your heart the up-downness of things, her curves and hollows, her extremes, her windy peaks and mini climates, her beauty, her trembling, her greed.
Yeah. Wow.
I think that is the fair city of San Francisco, don't you think?
Yes, absolutely. Did the character of Vera sort of come to you all at once? I mean, the story really depends on this assertive, never say die kid, you know, I mean.
Well, she did come. Usually my characters come to me through I can hear them. I knew I had a character when I wrote the line. All my life, I was looking for a catastrophe greater than my birth. And I wanted to create an adventure story that featured a girl who was at the cusp of womanhood, who was contrary by nature, but also contrary by what had been given to her. You know, she was essentially housed, but between 2 worlds. She was unloved, though she had 2 mothers. She was out of place with what was expected of a girl at 15 in 1906. You know, she was fast talking, fast thinking, not a great beauty. And the other side that came to me was a much older woman looking back on her life, the older Vera, looking back on her life at a point when she is well beyond the niceties, and she's honed her story to just the bare essentials. And that byplay between the narrator, the older narrator, and the young girl who moment to moment is having to survive in a corrupt world. Because of course there is the quake and the fire, but the underbelly of the story, the motor of the story is the corruption, the political corruption at play in San Francisco in 1906. The mayor of the town was quite a character, Eugene Schmitz. He had been a violinist, and not a prominent one, but a violinist. He was a good-looking guy, had a great head of hair, and was charismatic. And San Francisco was run by at the time was run by a guy named Abe Ruff. And Abe Ruff bought the sheriff, he bought the board of supervisors, and he put in the mayoral seat this Eugene Schmidt, the violinist, and they were on the take and all kinds of levels. And the two of them were going to be indicted on the morning of the quake. And instead of getting indicted, they got this disaster that actually saved their hides for about a year. Eventually, and the arc of the book is that year before they were tried and both sentenced to San Quentin. But as sometimes happens, Eugene Schmitz proved to be a fairly decent mayor in a crisis. Yeah. And that's interesting. That was interesting to me the more I researched things.
Right. Yeah. The parallels are striking sometimes. I was just like we had the earthquake today. Also this morning in the San Francisco Chronicle, there was a story of 2 more people indicted from the Planning Commission. You know, I mean, seems
that's right. And that was one of, I'm often asked what sort of got me rolling on this, in this nexus of 1906. And I'd been collecting stories about the quake because, San Francisco was my adopted town. I came out here from the East Coast to go to college and stayed. And I've now written 2 books set in San Francisco. So certainly it's caught my fancy. But I was fascinated by this idea that within a space of a minute, an entire society could collapse. I mean, what an incredible metaphor for not just drama and story, but also for me, where my curiosity went is what rises in a disaster. But I started thinking about political corruption and our society really in peril in terms of societal norms and change leading up to the 2016 election. And it seemed to go back in time to 1906, David, and just talk about how much has changed and how little has changed. It seemed like an interesting place to go and look at those characters, many of whom were real and many who are fictional.
Yeah, right. I'm tempted to wander off into more discussion of various former mayors of other cities too that could be problematic, but I think I'll leave that for another time.
Okay.
I was thinking
corruption isn't new is the point. And,
right.
And where there is money and power and the striving and ambition and people looking the other way, there's human folly and human error, right? Yeah. And that's what stories are all about.
Yeah. I was thinking about the response of the city to the 1906 quake, though, and the building of the sort of shanty towns and the tent cities and the tremendous, coming together of and recovering from the disaster, and comparing it with what we often see today, which is it seems to take a disaster to bring people together. I don't know.
Well, it brings out the best and the worst. But part of my job in writing the book was to really go deep into the research, but also to just live in that possibility of a city leveled, 250,000 people homeless, no water. The Army and the Navy was brought in, but food was scarce and no shelter. And many people were offloaded onto naval ships, but there was a great deal of the city was just set up in tents, first in tents, And then to your point, they built these temporary shanties, one-room shanties. Yeah, I was here for Loma Prieta, I can see. I did. I lived through Loma Prieta. And in fact, very good friends of ours had just moved to the city and were living in the marina. And their apartment was just devastated. So they came and lived with us. But yeah, it's interesting. I finished the book in January of 2020 and could never have anticipated that we were about to launch into our own life-changing disaster. And yet, and what I've heard from readers is the book in some ways feels so relevant to this moment, to this past 20 months, because one of the questions that propelled me through the book, in terms of putting all these different characters in this moment of crisis, is what would you do? That question of what would you do in a disaster? What would you do to survive? What would be your moral compass when nobody's looking? How do you show up for people, for strangers, for your own people? There is something in a crisis that forces everyone to recalibrate and to really prove who they are. And it also, for those who are marginalized, in the book, Vera looks at a Chinese family and a servant who is living in this madam's house, and who starts out as Vera's rival and ends up actually being her partner. Right. And what would it be to be a Chinese servant? This character Tan is, by some, in my mind, as he grew as a character, he actually is one of the most educated, refined people in the book. He knows wines. He's a master cook. He knows how to run a house. He knows how to move between businesses. Yet, because he is a Chinese servant in 1906, he's forced to live in the basement of this grand house on a dirt floor on cast-off furniture. And when the quake hit and Chinatown quickly burned in the fire, the Chinese were put in an encampment in the Presidio under lock and key. And so all of that aspect of society, what is correct, what is not correct, where have we evolved, where we haven't, for marginalized people at the time of the crisis, they had to find their way to survive. And in some cases, there was opportunity. There was opportunity to define yourself in a new way. And that all gets part of the stew of the book.
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, in some ways, the crisis we've been dealing with COVID has impacted marginalized communities worse than everybody else, as well.
Well, I wonder if we could say that every generation has a moment, at least one moment of reckoning, that defines who we are, what we are. And certainly we're in a moment right now. Right. And they were in a moment in 1906. And certainly in this book, Vera, everyone is in that moment.
Right. I was, you talked about you are originally from, I guess, the Midwest, and you kind of migrated.
No, East Coast, Connecticut.
East Coast, I'm sorry. It's all the same to me.
It's over there.
Yeah, over there. It's like those maps you see of Manhattan, and the rest is just over there. Anyway, and you ended up in San Francisco. So many. That's the story of so many writers. It seems to me, that city it seems like every other person is a writer. You know, I don't know if that's true or not, but boy, it's certainly a literary capital. I would say it's sort of at least second to New York as the literary capital of the United States. Would you say that?
I think San Francisco has a history of attracting entrepreneurial dreamers, people who are a little bit, who go a bit against the grain and who define their own path. It's one of the great legacies of this city. And beginning with the miners who had the audacity to risk everything, panning for gold, and who hit it big. And really, the city as we know it began with them. So it is a place where I think artists feel like there's room to create. Of course, the city has become so prohibitively expensive, and I'm not sure that's going to continue. And that would be unfortunate, because a lot of great work has come out of the West Coast.
Yeah,
and certainly to why we're here. The Bay Area is one of the great reading capitals of the country.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, do you participate in a writers group? I mean, these circles of writers?
I don't. I have some longtime trusted first readers, beginning with my husband, and a few friends who have kindly, patiently walked through drafts of books, and who are give me the real deal, give me the real feedback when I need it, and that's gold. That's pure gold. But I don't have a group per se, though friends of mine I know have writing groups that have stayed together, and I've taught for many years, and I've seen coming out of classes these groups that go on, and it's a wonderful thing to have that kind of community, and that kind of support.
I was going to ask you, something has jumped away from my head right now.
That's okay. That's okay. Lots to talk about. In one of the things you were asking before we got on, that about Alma de Bretteville.
Oh yeah, right.
And maybe I can talk a bit about her for those who, there were so many. I spent about 2 years researching the book before I really had.
That was what I was going to ask you about.
The nexus of what I wanted to look at, and these fictional characters, but the real life characters, besides the mayor and others, included Alma de Bretteville, who really deserves her own 10 novels. She was a larger than life character, and I think San Francisco has always bred these larger than life characters. But she started out very poor, the daughter of an impoverished Danish aristocrat, and she was a great beauty from day one, and very much wanted to be an artist, and couldn't afford to take drawing classes at the Art Institute. So she posed as a nude model. And from that became quite well known, not for her artistic capabilities, but for her other abilities, and was caught up in the statue in the middle of Union Square, the great statue has her face in the top of it. But also she became an early fodder for the gossip columns. She had a minor, she was engaged to a minor, and when he broke off the engagement, she sued him for $25,000 for personal deflowerization, one of the great terms of all times, and did not succeed in getting any money out of him, but got herself on the front page of the paper for weeks and weeks and weeks during the trial. Anyway, she fell in love with Spreckles, the heir to the sugar fortune, and eventually he married her and built her an incredible mansion. And she went on to be an early collector of some of the great artists, including Rodin and many others. And she founded the Legion of Honor. So one of the great arcs of her story is, here's this nude model, impoverished nude model, who went on to found one of the great museums. And our modern twist on that, her mansion is now owned by Danielle Steele.
Oh, I didn't know that. Wow.
So there you go. But there's lots of those stories. There's in the book, there's the moment that Caruso, the great tenor, comes to San Francisco to sing. And he was from Naples, and he had this, Mount Vesuvius had erupted just a few weeks before Caruso was due to come westward to San Francisco. And he was so nervous about that and missed his family in Naples. And as he took the train out to San Francisco, and it was a very big deal that this great tenor was coming, because San Francisco was still very Wild West, kind of just getting on its legs in terms of proper society. And this was going to be the great sort of awakening of society in San Francisco. And Caruso took this 10-day train ride and couldn't sleep. He had nightmares. He was convinced he was going to be murdered in town. And San Francisco was one of the most murderous capitals of the country at that time. Anyway, he arrives, and what happens? He performs, and that night the quake happens. And he could not have gotten out of San Francisco fast enough. He got on a ferry and never came back.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I had heard about the Caruso part of the story. I knew about that.
There's wonderful firsthand accounts, and there is even an account of some of what Caruso said the day after the quake as he walked around. Of course, the first thing he did once he got his valet to bring all his trunks down from the Palace Hotel was he went and tried to find a good breakfast. He was hungry.
Right. I guess the Palace Hotel must have survived the quake itself, but then the fire got it, or
it burned. And interesting, it was touted to be the safest hotel in the world because there were fire alarms on every floor, and underneath they had built a reservoir of water to fight fire. What they did, the poor Palace Hotel next door was the Mint, and they took the water that belonged to the Palace Hotel to save the Mint. And so the Palace Hotel burned.
Yeah, because Alma and Spreckles were staying there, right? The night of the quake.
Well, that was a little poetic license, but
okay. Okay, yeah.
They coulda, woulda, David.
I was going to ask you about the sort of when do you break off the history and move into to your own imaginings of some of these things, or is it just whatever serves the book?
In all my books, there's sort of a nexus of the political, a moment when society is at strain, and certainly characters bent on reinvention, self-invention. And but I love, one of the things I love about being a novelist is to research and learn about things.
Yeah.
And so I go way down deep into the research, and then at a point I sort of have to forget what I know and see what sticks, and see what sticks in terms of serving my story, the story I've created. So I never really know what details. I often read actual newspapers. I go to firsthand accounts. In this case, there are such a richness of photographs from those days.
Yeah.
And I never kind of know what little detail will stick, but always first and foremost, my job is to serve the reader and the reader's experience. And as much as this is a book about disaster and corruption, it's also it's funny, and it's an adventure story. You know, it has that kind of, I wanted it to be an entertainment too. So because for me, people are endlessly fascinating in their ability to create trouble and folly. So there's plenty of that in here too.
It was clear to write this thing. I mean, 2 years on that. Yeah, wow.
Well, it took about 6 years to write this book. 2 of those years researching and really turning over sort of what I needed to know, what I needed to know to make you convinced as a reader that you are right in this time, this place. I want you to be able to smell it and hear it, taste it, all this, as many of the senses as possible to come alive.
Yeah. Are you, is it appropriate for me to ask if you're working on a new book now, or?
I am. I'm actually, God help me, working on 2 books.
Oh, wow.
One is nonfiction and one is fictional. And you know, I'm at the beginning. So it's a humbling moment to always to be at the beginning.
To be with 2 books, my goodness. Yeah, wow. Are you finding I imagine that nonfiction shouldn't be too hard for you after this book, which is almost nonfiction in some ways. You know, I mean, you hung a fiction book on a nonfiction frame, I guess you might say.
Well, it's all story, isn't it? It's all story, and it's all grounded in human nature. And, you know, when I think, you know, being with all of you and the library, I think about my own beginning in the library. And, you know, my parents weren't particularly, great readers, but they gave me access to our public library, and I spent a lot of time there. I could not get my hands on enough books. I mean, I just ate them. And the great thing about when I think about my youngest days, is nobody was watching me at the library. So there wasn't anybody to say, oh, these are the good books and these are the not so good books, or, you know, make sure you read. I just read everything. And in that way, story came to me. And in that way, you develop your own sense of what moves you. And I was talking to I was talking to some students the other day, and they were asking, you know, what is an early book that really moved you? And I was thinking about Johnny Tremain. And I remember I was probably 9, maybe 10. And that story that was both fictional, but there were real characters. There was John Hancock, there was Paul Revere, there were all those folks. And how much I loved that book. That book just I can still remember where I was curled up in a chair reading it, and the day passed. And, in some ways, I guess I'm writing my own version of John H. Remain, and many, many other books after that. But that sense of when a story can just take you and time disappears, and
Yeah.
you're inside another world. I mean, that I just, I think as readers, we hunger for that.
Yeah. I bet you anybody could, in our audience, could name a book like that for them. As you were talking about it, I was thinking it's almost embarrassing to tell you that the book that kind of really got me to be a reader was Stopover Tokyo. It was a Mr. Moto Mystery by John P. Marquand.
There you go.
I don't know.
It caught you, right?
Yeah, it caught me.
It caught you. And that's all that matters,
right.
to tell me a story. It's so basic. It's so magical.
Yeah, exactly. Before I forget about it, I wanted to ask you if you felt like telling us a little bit about your narrativemagazine.com and your and the education narrative.
Oh, I'd love to tell you about it. So 18 years ago, my husband, who was an editor in New York, and I started narrativemagazine.com. It was the early days of the internet, and we've started publishing. It's a nonprofit, and our mission is twofold. One, to both discover, publish, and pay the great writers of our time. So it's pretty much a who's who of literature in our library, and also to promote reading by making all of the contents free for readers. So you only have to sign up. You just give your email and you have access to the whole library, which is thousands of stories, poems, essays, interviews. And what's happened across 18 years is we have a readership all over the world, in Malaysia, in Africa, in Russia, in Eastern Europe, and teachers who can't afford to buy books for their students in this country. And it is appalling how many towns in this country, how many schools just don't have money for books. And also in terms of the globe, they use narrative, the library of narrative, as the basis of reading and teaching reading and writing. So it's become something that has grown much bigger than we ever anticipated, but it's a welcome place. It's a community. It's a modern digital library. So narrativemagazine.com.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Okay. Well,
and we have a whole schools program to give resources to teachers.
Okay. Yeah. Is Vera going to be out in paperback?
Vera, I just was talking to my publisher today. Vera's coming out in paperback March 1st.
Oh, okay. Wow.
And I'll be doing some things around that. And yeah, I can't believe, she came out March 2nd of this year, which feels like a very long year to all of us, doesn't it?
Yeah. Wow.
It's a year that's had so much happen in this past year, but it's hard to believe we're already looking at Thanksgiving next week, isn't it?
It feels like the book's been out longer than that to me, but wow.
No. I also want to tell you all, I can see from the chat, any of you folks listening, if you're on Instagram, I know, David, we were talking about this earlier. Every Tuesday, I do a little a little video of a series called A Word Please, where I take a word and I play with it and talk about where its origin was and the story of how it's changed to our modern usage. And often I write a little something about it. This week's, it wasn't a word, it was a phrase, negative capability, which is a fascinating concept. And something we could all use in our tool bag right now. So on Instagram, I'm just, my first initial C, Edgarian, and just look around and you'll see the videos of all the words I've done.
Oh, great.
Hope you'll join me.
Oh, yeah, I'll look for that. Yeah, I haven't had a chance yet to do that.
I see there's all these questions, but I can't see them. Can you see them?
I'm having a little trouble reading them too.
So,
let's see.
Let's see. Oh, you click on the chat. So let's see.
Yeah.
Yes, Vera. Someone asked about the Audible version.
Yeah.
A fantastic actress, Kate Mazur, has recorded Vera, and I listened to any number of actors read, and I said, only Kate can do it. She's so good. And thank goodness she was willing to do it. And we've become great friends. And I'm so completely knocked out by her talent and her ability to become all these different characters. So yes, check out the Audible if that's how you want to listen to it.
Yeah, right. My wife listens to audios all the time. In fact, I think she may well have listened to it. I think she probably has.
Oh, great.
Rather than having read it, because she's the person who told me about the book.
Oh, fantastic.
And I think she had done it by audio.
So someone asked, will the characters continue in future books? That's a great question. I'm getting that question a lot from people. And it has started to turn over in my mind that it would be really fun to revisit Vera in sort of the middle of the 20th century, because of course she lives all the way up to the 1990s. So yeah, I have that in the back of my noggin. It's not the next book, but who knows? Might go back there. There's a lot of life, a few husbands she has. So maybe. Yeah.
So there's also here somebody asking about the names of your other books, and let's see, I had it before. Let's see, the 3 Stages of Amazement and Rise the Euphrates.
Yeah, and they're available in all the usual places, Amazon, etc. Yep. When did you know you would become a writer? That's a great question. Yeah. I was that kid, I said I was such a reader. I was that kid writing poetry, when I was 8, 9, 10. I just came across one of those journals when I was showing things to my daughters. To say I'm a writer felt like hallowed ground to me. So I didn't dare ever say that. I just wrote. And I wrote all through my teens and through high school. And it wasn't until I was in college that a mentor introduced me to another writer, a visiting writer, and said, Carol is a writer. And my knees got shaky. I thought, oh, wow. Wow. I didn't identify as a writer because that felt highfalutin to me, but I always wrote, and it's how I always made sense, how I could make sense of the world through writing.
Carol, I'm having a little trouble with my internet. I'm getting this.
Do you want me to see what other
message saying my internet is unstable, so it seems like I'm sort of pausing
Who are your favorite authors? Oh, that is the impossible question. I'm going to say someone, and then I'm going to, when we get off, I'm going to say, oh, I forgot to say, I love Austen, Virginia Woolf, Eudora Welty, the Russians. Tolstoy is one of my great heroes. I read him over and over and over again. Zora Neale Hurston and her sister Toni Morrison. I mean, the linkages. So much about writing is realizing you're coming in on a very long conversation, and to see where one writer influenced another writer is always fascinating to me. When I first read Toni Morrison, the world changed for me. New possibilities opened. E.L. Doctorow has been somebody I've returned to again and again. Shirley Hazard's The Transit of Venus, one of the great masterly novels, just brilliant. And I know I'm forgetting. I read a lot of poetry. I tend to begin the day with poetry. That's a little bit of a sampling. But
okay.
Yeah. Let's see.
Yeah, I think that more or less covered all the questions we have here as far as I can see. One person who asked about the titles of your other two books also asked, where have you been teaching?
I've taught all over the place. I haven't, because of my work with narrative and also trying to get these books written the past few years, I haven't been teaching, but I may go back to it. I love teaching. My Instagram is sort of my word please is my teaching moment each week, and I hope you'll all join. I'd love to hear any words you want me to turn around. David, we were talking about, for example, the word vote began to mean vow. A vote was a vow. And I love that resonance of, when we vote, we're making a vow.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, I'll have to get into the 21st century and get on Instagram and check that out. I haven't so far have not done any Instagram checking out or anything, so I'll have to do it.
I'm also on Twitter and Facebook, but I lately Instagram seems like a friendlier garden to play around in. And please come to narrativemagazine.com and get lost in the stacks there and enjoy.
Okay. Well, I think that is all the questions we have, Carol. So I think I'm going to just say thank you very much for a wonderful talk and for a wonderful book as well.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we'll be looking for that paperback and for the next one or two books, whatever they are. So again, thanks a lot for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
Yeah. Folks, before we go, I wanted to remind you of a few upcoming programs that we have. On December 13th, we're going to have a talk with Lauren Gunderson, who's been named America's most published or America's most produced playwright twice. And she has a new play opening at the Marin Theater Company actually tomorrow night. It's called Georgiana and Kitty, Christmas at Pemberley, which is a part of the Jane Austen Pride and Prejudice Melu. Anyway, that'll be December 13th. She'll be talking with us. Then on January 19th, we're going to have Laura Zimmeroff, who is the writer of a book called Technically Food, which is about Silicon Valley's entry into the paradigm shift that's about what we eat toward plant-based foods. Just several interesting ideas there. Then in February, we're going to be welcoming back the Phoenix, Arizona docent Cheryl Coupon for a special Black History Month presentation on the artist Jacob Lawrence, who she has mentioned in passing in a couple of her previous docent talks with us. So we hope you can join us for those events. And of course, we're going to continue on farther into the future with author talks and docent talks. Before we go, I want to remind you again that we do depend on your donations in order to put on these programs. We have a link in the chat to make it easier for you to do that. Our goal is to see that the library can live long and prosper, as someone with a Starfleet communicator badge might say. So that's our story. I want to thank the rest of our Friends at Home team, Karen Romer, Karen Manuel, Becky Sir, Jacqueline Yokoyama, and Billy Reinsmith. And of course, thanks again to Carol for a delightful presentation and a wonderful book. Finally, I thank you, the audience, who make these events so enjoyable. Have a good evening, and we'll see you next time.